G'day, I'm Carl Charter. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for Marion Cancel for having me today to talk about our local rocky reef. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders of the past and present. The Kaurna people lived and fished on the shores of the Wongadjila, the Kaurna, named for the Gulf St Vincent, for 80,000 years before we actually came to this area. Just a little bit about myself before I start. I was born locally, or when I say locally, I was born in South Australia in the desert. So I was a bit of a desert baby back in 1970. But we did move around a bit with my parents' work. So I ended up being in Jervis Bay, which is a marine park area where I got my interest for doing all the diving that I'm doing today. I did come back to South Australia and went to high school at Aberfoyle Park, and then moved up to Southern Cross in Lismore to do a degree in marine science. I don't see myself as a marine biologist, but I have got that marine background, a general kind of background. I did work in maritime archaeology of shipwrecks for about a year before I got into more marine-related work. I've had a bit of a background in training as well, so through community colleges and TAFE. I did go inland again, do some greening Australia with trees, but that didn't really suit me. It was too far from the ocean, so came back to Adelaide about 18 years ago, and I've worked for Reef Watch. I co-founded a group called EMS, Experiencing Marine Sanctuaries, and that's where I get to take a lot of people out to introduce them to the marine environment in South Australia. Okay, so today I'm going to take you for a bit of a virtual dive. I've got a whole collection here of photos taken around South Australia over the last probably 5 to 10 years, a lot of them more recently. So let's put our masks and snorkels on and go for a bit of a dive. Just like to say the temperate reef is more a rocky reef with kelp rather than a coral like you might see on some TV shows. In South Australia, we've got the Great Southern Reef, which goes from just north of Perth around to just south of Sydney. So I'll be talking about species found in that whole kind of area along the coast. So you can see here that we have got a very, very colourful reef in South Australia. This is actually a pylon at the Jetty at Edithburgh. It's one of my favourite dives for colour. We've got a lot of ascidians and colourful sponges and see the sea stars as well. So we call this the Great Southern Reef, and it is a very diverse, colourful reef. Oh, I think we've actually gone backwards, sorry. So we've got the temperate reef here with a very high diversity of endemic species, which means they're found nowhere else in the world. So yeah, a lot of our species in South Australia are quite colourful, as you can see. Anemones, different types of reef fish, nudibranchs, a whole rainbow of colours. So I'll be going through and showing some photos and videos of those during the presentation. So 85% of our fish species are found only in this part of the world. That's an image taken just recently under Rapid Bay Jetty on a nice clear day. You can see the sun kind of coming through from the top there, and also the fish around the base. They call it the Aquarium, and you can see why. It's just an incredible dive. So 95% of all the molluscs are also found only in this part of the world. So I'll be going through quite a few of these, and one of my favourites is the giant Australian cuttlefish, which aggregates in the Gulf in South Australia once a year around this time of year, just starting to move into Whyalla, Stony Point. We get about 120,000 of those move in each year. So I'll show you a few videos and photos of that as well. 90% of our sea stars and urchins also are endemic to this area. So we can't forget the macroalgae. That's the kelp that we find in South Australia. That covers most of the rocky reef. We've also got green algae and red algae. So here's a picture taken at Hallett Cove Beach probably last summer. So we're moving in. You can see a whole mixture there of different algae and plants. So the only plant we've got in there is seagrass. The rest of it's algae, brown algae mainly, with a bit of red algae covering the rocks. So there's a lot of colour in the reef from those algae, and we found that there's 25% of the world's total number of red algae species and 75% of those only occur in South Australia. So they're more of a pink when you see them underwater. So this is an encrusting algae. We've got a few algae here growing. This one here has been eaten by Nuudibranch, so that's a small algae, turf algae, which is being eaten there by that Nuudibranch. And there's some nice kind of coralline red algae here as well, which is quite tough, like a toothbrush to feel it. Just want to see if I can get a bit of a video going here, if I can, just to show you a bit about the rocky reef. So this is a video I took probably a couple of years ago at the Bluff in Victor Harbour. It's one of my favourite dives for Leafy Sea Dragons, but it also shows you the nice cover of algae. So you've got the kelp here, the large macroalgae. You've also got the green algae, and you've got red algae as well covering, it's encrusting. And you can see quite a few Leafy Sea Dragons heading around that bit of reef. If you look closely, you can see at least 2 leafies there together. We often hear whale song in the background here as well. So you have like the Leafy Sea Dragons, the reef fish, the algae, plus the whale song in the background. So yeah, one of my favourite marine creatures, along with the cuttlefish, is the Leafy Sea Dragon. I just heard recently that David Attenborough's favourite marine critter is the Leafy Sea Dragon, which is pretty cool. All right, so that's a bit of video. Might just keep on going through the photos. Okay, so we get a lot of sponges in South Australia as well, so they cover the reef in lots of nice colour. You can see the range of different shapes and sizes. This one here is just on the Noarlunga Reef, so anyone can go out and see that. It's in the gap at Noarlunga. Sponges usually grow with a lot of water current because they are filter feeders. So if you do want to see sponges like this, you can see them as close as the Noarlunga Jetty. Okay, so sponges are used for camouflage and for habitat and defence. So you can see here we've got one of my favourite crabs, the SpongeBob crab we call it. It actually carries a bit of sponge on its back as a bit of habitat and protection and camouflage. So if you see them out in amongst the sponge they live, all you'll see is the top of the sponge, you won't see the crab. So they're very camouflaged. This one here is actually a sea slug or a Nuudibranch, and you can see how it's exactly the same as this sponge here, so they actually feed and live on those sponges. So I was lucky enough to see one away from it. It's quite hard to see otherwise. But yeah, a lot of the Nuudibranchs do eat sponge and have them as habitat as well, which is great. And these are scallops here, which they call dough scallops, and they're covered in sponge as well. So they'll form an attachment to, say, a pylon or a rocky reef and really get in amongst the sponge to get camouflaged. So this is a pylon that we find down at Edithburgh Jetty, one of my favourite dives for colour. So we've got 189 species of what is called a sea squirt or an ascidian. So there is sponge on here as well, but there's also ascidians growing. It's really hard to tell between the ascidians and the sponge. This is sponge, of course, ascidians, and this yellow here is also ascidians. They all collect in one area, so that lots of little one-cell organisms that kind of stick together in a colony. So yeah, 189 species recorded already in this state. Here's another photo taken at Edithburgh Jetty, showing all the ascidians and all these sponges. You also see the black cowrie shell here as well. So there's one right in the centre there. They're quite a special black cowrie shell. They are protected, and there's one there as well. You can't see it very clearly in this photo, but that one's really heavily scratched by a diver using a knife. The diver probably thought he was doing the right thing to scratch it heavily so it wouldn't get taken by other shell collectors. But since they have done some research and found that can damage the actual shell itself. So yeah, it's probably not good to do that. Some more of the ascidian growth. So you can see how colourful it is. It's incredible. People don't actually realise how colourful South Australian diving is. But if you look underneath ledges and on pylons like this under jetties, you do see all this colour. Another ascidian. We've got an anemone, which is usually covered up by a rock. We found this one at Rapid Bay, and they're quite a large anemone, come in all different colours, through from yellow through to purple and red. So this one's a robust zoanthid. You see this one of most snorkels around the place. There's a lot around Hallett Cove, and also you see it at Second Valley as well. And they do use plants to, they have actually algae within their bodies to synthesize light into energy. Sea jellies, so a lot of people call these jellyfish, but they're actually called sea jellies on a fish, so they changed the name. It's a picture of my son. I think this was taken at Stony Point Whaler a few years ago. Quite a few jellyfish around the area. All right, one of my favourite marine life is the Leafy Sea Dragon. They were found at Rapid Bay in large numbers in the past, but sadly, I think because of pressure of lots of divers and also had quite a few stormy days in the last year, they've moved out away from the jetty. They're still there, of course, but they're just a bit hard to find. So you have to go out elsewhere to find them at the moment. Now you go through, show you some of the different colour variations. This one's like a chocolatey colour. They do stay that colour their whole life. They're a really beautiful colour, like a bronze kind of colour. One of my photos on the Rapid Bay Jetty, portrait shot. Around August and September each year, these Leafy Sea Dragons do congregate in one area to do their courtship dances, so they'll be found together between about August and September. You can see there one of my dive buddies enjoying, there was actually 5 Leafy Sea Dragons there gathered around at the back of Rapid Bay Jetty. So they'll do a mating dance, so you'll see them for hours just together doing a courtship, and I've had one lady who was wielding a camera at the time, but she filmed a whole sequence of mating of these creatures. They're just like basically moving around each other for quite a while. You can see the tail there just behind, so there's 2 there doing a courtship dance. This can go on for probably a month or more. And then around, probably around November, December, we start seeing these eggs form, or not form, but carried by the male sea dragon. So after that courting dance, the female will actually inject those into a pouch, fertilise into the male's tail, and the male will just carry those for, I think it's about 8 weeks or more, while the female goes off and has some more parties and has some more babies with other males. So this male was seen sitting at Rapid Bay Jetty like this for probably a good month or so before it kind of disappeared, but it did sit in the same place for quite a few weeks, just protecting those eggs, making sure there's oxygen going over the eggs. This is a Leafy Sea Dragon that was spotted just locally at Hallett Cove. So we've had quite a few, okay, we've got a few questions coming up. Get to those in a sec. I was diving Hallett Cove about probably 4 years ago now with a friend looking for Nuudibranchs, and up came this very small Leafy Sea Dragon in front of my camera. So this is the photo we took as it swam past. It was probably about 6 to 8 weeks old, and it was about probably 8 centimetres long, so quite a small kind of transparent looking baby Leafy Sea Dragon. So it's good to see they are coming into those areas, since I have seen them in other areas close to that as well, along with weedy sea dragons. So someone's asked me what kind of camera I use. I've just changed camera rigs. I was using a Nikon D80 with an Aquatica underwater housing and strobes. A year ago, I was lucky enough to be, in a way, sponsored by Nauticam, and they purchased and sent me an underwater housing for a Nikon D7500, which I purchased myself, but I was basically had to update to that camera. The housing is a Nauticam housing. I've got 2 strobes on that, so I use a wide angle lens for this sort of shot. So that's a 10.5 fisheye lens, and I also have a 105 millimeter macro lens and also a 60mm macro lens. I do like getting the shots like this, the wide angle shots, but that last shot that we just had, that was taken probably with the 60mm macro lens. I was looking for Nuudibranchs at the time, so I didn't have a wide angle on. Yeah, thank you for that question from Yvonne. So yeah, a couple more photos of the Leafy Sea Dragon. This is under Rapid Bay Jetty, so they do sit around quite close. This one was only within 20 metres of the entry point at the Rapid Bay Jetty. And then out the back of the jetty, you do see quite a few more, especially around August, September. This one's the chocolate variation again. I see those mostly at the Bluff at Victor Harbour, but they do occur other places as well. So, yeah, I'm lucky enough to be a dive instructor who can take guided dives. It's one of my favourite jobs, actually take people like this from overseas to witness and with their own eyes the Leafy Sea Dragon. You can't see the Leafy Sea Dragon anywhere else apart from the southern part of Australia. They do occur in large numbers in these waters right around to Western Australia, and they do go into Victoria on rare occasions. A couple of local divers that came out to Rapid Bay. This is my very first Leafy photo, probably the one that got me into underwater photography. It was taken with a small compact camera, so it's a very small camera that basically, yeah, in a small housing. It was not very professional, about 10 years ago. But you can still get a very good shot with the compact camera. And this Leafy just swam past one day at the Bluff and it was up. For some reason it was up in the water column, which is unusual. My buddy and I were swimming along quite high up in the water column. They had two Leafys actually swim past together, which is, yeah, I haven't seen it before again since. Yeah, getting down, taking photos. It's one of my dive buddies taking photos at Rapid Bay Jetty. The Leafy Sea Dragon is also incredible. We don't get those as much in South Australia. I have seen them quite a bit around the Seacliff Reef and also Rapid Bay Jetty. One dive just recently, the Bluff, I saw what I thought was several very small baby Leafy Sea Dragons. When I identified the babies, they're actually weedy sea dragons. So they do occur in large numbers around Encounter Bay, Victor Harbour. For some reason, all the babies kind of get pushed in against the reef certain times of the year, and they disperse when they get a bit bigger. So I actually haven't got any good photos of those baby weedings because they were in a bit of a moving water column, and it was like trying to take a photo of a fly through a straw, really. It was really hard. So this is probably the best I've got, the adult leaf weedings. You can see there they've got colours like an Aboriginal dot painting. They're just incredible. That's not enhanced at all. That's the way they look underwater with a good torch or spotlight. And yeah, the dot look on there is just like an Aboriginal dot painting. It's really quite colourful. Got another question just come out. How large do Leafy Sea Dragons grow? From Kathy. The largest, I did actually see one just last week on a dive. I won't say where, because they're pretty hard to find these days, but it would have been at least 35 centimetres long, and they have been known to grow over 40 centimetres. So a lot of people it's a good question, because a lot of people I take out to see the Leafy Sea Dragon for the first time think they're going to be a small seahorse-sized type critter, but when they actually see it, and they look bigger underwater, of course, they can be 40 centimetres long. So it really does surprise people when they do see how large these can grow. These are the juvenile weedy sea dragons. These ones were seen down at the Bluff quite a few years ago. I saw 14 in a school, which is really unusual. I had a macro lens, so I couldn't really get a good shot of the school or squadron of the weedies. But this is the best I got probably of that school. I was with a man from Canada, and he'd come to South Australia to just see the weedy and the Leafy Sea Dragon. So when I pointed out 14 weedies over this boulder at the Bluff, he quickly floated to the surface with excitement. So we had to get him down again. He took some photos. So yeah, they are really beautiful sea dragons, you can see, but quite uncommon. Okay, so we've got quite a few molluscs in South Australia as well. Limpets. So Nuudibranch is a sea slug, and the sea slug basically has these gills at the back, which are naked gills. That's where it gets its Latin name, Nuudibranch, naked gill. And you see them, they're very hard to see sometimes, they're very small. This one would have been about 1 centimetre or 2 long. They do grow some species up to maybe 1 foot long, but that's really unusual. Most of them are between about 10 centimetres and down to like the size of a grain of rice. So you can imagine how hard it is to find them. But there are many people in South Australia who do go out and photograph these, and that's their main kind of photographic target with a macro lens. You can see they come in a whole range of different sizes and colours. This one here. This is a Nuudibranch that's about 1 foot long. Saw that one at Second Valley, and I've never seen one before or after, so Yeah, it was the largest Nuudibranch I've ever seen in South Australia, which was quite good to see. It was moving across the sand quite speedily. So this one's eating the red algae. And the next slide, we're getting to cryptic fish. You might think that's red algae, and if you swam past that as a diver and you saw that on the rocks, you'd think it was red algae. But if you look closely, you can see an eye. There's an eye there, and there's an eye there as well. Don't know if you can zoom in on that. But there are two eyes and there are a mouth just here. So that's a tasseled anglerfish. So they'll sit around. They're quite a small fish, probably up to about 15 centimetres long. They'll sit around like that all day until a small fish goes past. They've got a small angler, I can't see in this photo, but they'll kind of move that around to attract fish in. Then their mouth will just open up and grab that fish as it goes past as their food source. So quite an interesting fish. This is another sort of anglerfish. Overseas they're called frogfish. And they've got a huge mouth angler. They'll actually move that angler around to attract smaller fish and then grab that fish as it comes in closer. They come in all shapes and sizes and colours. These are mostly, I found most of these down at Edithburgh Jetty, and on some dives you see them out and about like this one was. Others you might have to look a bit further under rocks and bits of rubble to actually see them. This one here is camouflaged really well, as you can see against the sand. It's got sand in the background, and it's actually got sand attached to it as well. You can see its mouth and its eyes, so they're really hard to see unless you know what you're looking for. You can just swim past and not see them at all. Here's one you can quite clearly see the angler here. So that's actually moved around. It's attached on the front there. It'll move around and it will attract fish in, and they'll just grab their prey as it goes past. Okay, some other cryptic fish. We've got the reef fish here, the herringtail, which is quite a colourful fish. You see those quite regularly, but they are quite good at ducking away into the kelp. So as soon as you get close, they'll be covered in the kelp. This one is probably the best picture I've got, which isn't the best, but it shows the colours in this kale. Underneath the jetties in South Australia would be one of my favourite dives, taken at Rapid Bay just recently. On a really clear day, you can see forever. There'll be schools of fish all around you. Very popular for free divers and snorkelers as well. About 5 metres deep, so you can easily free dive that jetty. It gets to about 8 to 9 metres at the back of the jetty. This is taken again at the aquarium we talked about before. So you've got those shafts of light coming through, and we've always got stacks of reef fish gathering around in this area they call the aquarium. So if anyone wants to go for a good dive, this is highly recommended to get out to the actual Tina section at Rapid Bay Jetty and have a look. Or you can stay in shallow. This is taken just near the entry point, and there are quite a few reef fish. These ones are zebrafish that regularly swim through. So if you're a snorkeler, we do take groups with the organisation I manage called EMS out to the Rapid Bay Jetty. If you're very lucky, you'll see a Leafy Sea Dragon, but if you're not, you'll be guaranteed a lot of reef fish, a lot of colour on the pylons. Okay, so a few more pictures of the jetty. These are called the old wife fish. They're an angelfish. Swimming through, we get some large schools of yellow-tailed scad coming through. This is one of my favourite fish down at Second Valley. It's the blue devil. This one's probably only about 3 centimetres long, quite a juvenile fish. So they'll be seen in the crevices and cracks in the reefs. If you look closely, you'll see them just sitting there. As you get close, they do dart into the crevice, so you have to be quite still when you're looking at them. As you go back over the months, they do grow quite quickly. This one's probably about 8 or 9 centimetres long, maybe a few months old. Then again, they get bigger. Can anyone out there tell me how big these fish do grow and how old they'll be if you found one that was, say, fully grown? I don't know if anyone out there is listening who knows about blue devils, but it's quite incredible to hear the length that they grow. That gave it away. And also how old they are when they actually get to that length. So I'll come back to that one at the end. This one's fully grown, laying eggs out at Sea Cliff Reef. Okay, sea stars, there are quite a few sea stars in South Australia. Just go through the different shapes and sizes we've got. One of my favourites is the biscuit sea star. It's actually like someone's actually created that as a bit of jewellery. It's just incredible detail there with all the gold through it. These are very popular for underwater photographers from overseas, but in South Australia they're so common, a lot of people just go past them and don't even take a photo, but you can see how magnificent they are. A lot of colour. Again. Okay, so I don't know if anyone's seen one of these before. They do occur in Encounter Bay at Victor Harbour, and also I've seen them down at Stenhouse Bay Jetty. It's called a basket sea star, so they are a sea star. But as they sit there at night, or when there's a current going through, they'll unfurl their arms and filter feed with these arms. So it looks more like a bit of coral when it's actually unfurled out and feeding on that sort of thing. So this one, these sea stars are slightly different. They're found at Stenhouse Bay, and they're all over the pylons there. So if you ever go for a snorkel or a dive there, you're almost guaranteed of seeing those. Got sea urchins. Okay, rays and sharks. We've got quite a few different species of rays and sharks. I won't go through them all during this presentation. I'll show you a few photos we've taken recently. This one was taken at Christie's Beach probably 2 or 3 months ago. And these eagle rays are quite often found inshore like that, resting in the sand. This one's only about 2 metres of water, and we saw 4 in that area at Christie's Beach Reef on that day, along with quite a few Port Jackson sharks. Spotted wobbegong shark. One of my favourites is the Port Jackson shark. And about 2 or 3 years ago, we had a huge congregation of breeding sharks come into the shallow reef around Adelaide. You can see here they've just basically laid all over each other. That's them resting during the day. At night, they're out actively feeding and probably mating at night and laying their eggs on the reef. So they'll lay an egg. A lot of people probably see it on the beach, kind of a twirled egg. They'll position themselves over a crack on the reef when there's a bit of current. They'll drop that egg very carefully after trying for hours sometimes, and that egg with the current gets turned into the reef. You do see them carrying the eggs around in their mouth sometimes, and researchers tell me that's more when they're positioned in their mouth actually crunch down and eat an egg of another shark. So they will eat their own eggs, not their own eggs, but the other shark's eggs. So there's a picture here taken just recently at Christie's Beach Reef, and you can see quite a few sharks in there. There's probably 3 or 4 deep. This young boy was only about 12 years old and was a bit hesitant to go snorkeling, but when he saw the sharks and how close they were, we couldn't get him away from the reef. So I think we've converted him, he'll be back. So that was a really quite shallow bit of reef. It was probably only waist deep water, and we could see the sharks tucked underneath. It was quite late as well. It was only 2 or 3 months ago, and usually they're there about November each year. Okay, we've got the white shark, of course taken from a cage at Port Lincoln. Here's a couple I took quite a few years ago. I haven't been back to do the cage diving. I haven't seen any sharks for quite a while, but it is a good trip to do if you want to get some photos. And their main food source out there, the sea lion. This one's taken at the Rapid Head Marine Sanctuary Zone about 2 or 3 years ago. Went down there for a bit of a snorkel and dive, and we saw quite a few sea lions swim through. Okay, this great southern right whale, which we saw at the head of the bight. So it's a really good trip to do in South Australia if you want to see whales, either Victor Harbour or head of the bight. So yeah, quite a few mothers and calves in the bay there at the head of the bight. Gorgonian fans, we've seen a bit of this on some other photos. If you go underneath the ledges at Encounter Bay, Victor Harbour, you'll see a lot of this Gorgonian fan, all different colours. It goes from white right through those colours. Very colourful underneath ledges and that sort of thing. It does grow on pylons as well on some jetties. All right, a couple of other creatures. This one is a sea spider. It's more related to a crab, but it's actually called a sea spider. and it's got eggs tucked under there as well. So that one actually landed on my hand when I was diving at the Bluff probably 3 or 4 years ago. It's actually happened again at Hallett Cove. They seem to float in the water column. They'll just kind of attach and crawl across you, which sounds pretty creepy, but they're actually really cool. They're very tiny. They're probably only about a centimetre across, so they're very hard to see. Another sponge crab, one of my favourites. Got the hermit crab. These are sand crabs out at Hallett Cove Beach a couple of years ago. Everyone would know about the blue swimmer. It's quite common in our waters, probably just starting to go now after the breeding season. And again, the same boy on one of our trips came across a blue swimmer, which is almost as big as him. They do grow quite huge. Okay, we've got the fan worms. Large schools of fish. All right, so a lot of people would have been out in our waters for squid. It's a huge pastime in South Australia, but to see them underwater is quite incredible. Down at Merino about a year ago, we had an aggregation of thousands in one area. I got some really good 360 footage of that. Bobtails. The blue-ringed octopus, which is probably one of the most venomous creatures in the ocean, one of the most dangerous. But yeah, they're very small, and people do wear gloves and that sort of thing when they're diving because of them in South Australia. You can get absolutely hundreds of the things crawling around at night especially. All right, so just to finish off, we're getting into cuttlefish season. So South Australia is known all around the world for their giant Australian cuttlefish. While at Stony Point is a place to go. I've been going there for the last 15 years and taking pictures, and just recently, the last 4 or 5 years, we've been taking people up there to go snorkelling. So large groups of people can come up to the organisation I manage called Experiencing Marine Sanctuaries, and we can take them for a snorkel. So I'll show you a few photos of those to finish off. You can see the colour, when they're in their mating colours at the start of the season, they're incredible to watch. Shimmering, trying to ward off other males hovering around waiting for the other male to move away so they can mate with the female. Often one female with about 11 males waiting to mate and have fertilise her eggs. See here one has started to mate and there's a male here waiting. There's quite a few on the horizon waiting to come in to mate with that same female. So you can see why after about 3 months they do start to get a bit tired looking. Their arms start to fall off, their eyes fall out, they start to die. They only live 1 year, so they mate for that 2 or 3 months, then they all die. Their eggs are left to hatch for the next season. Okay. Just going to go to the end of the presentation here. Just one more cuttlefish shot. Just shows the number of cuttlefish you'll find. This is only probably in 3 metres of water. But if you counted all the cuttlefish in here, you'll probably get about 20 or 30 cuttlefish. And you'll get, on average, about 1 per square metre if you go for a snorkel or dive there, between June and August. All right, thank you. I've had a couple of questions. I'm not sure if you've got any more. I think we might be getting a couple more through at the moment. So I'll stay for a little bit longer and answer a couple of questions. But if you do want to join me for a snorkel with the giant Australian cuttlefish, there's a link here for EMS. If you want to zoom in on that, we've got snorkels just starting now. We're just about to advertise an extra weekend of snorkeling. The first weekend in July is totally booked out since all the restrictions eased. And I'm going to advertise, as of tomorrow, another weekend, the 11th and 12th of July with EMS. So we provide all the equipment, warm wetsuits, trained guides, we do all the sanitation of the equipment. It's all safe and supervised snorkeling. EMS is a not-for-profit group run by volunteers, so we've got a lot of people helping out on the day doing safety and taking tours. So join me for that. If you want to follow me on social media and have a look at a few more of my photos and videos, a good one to watch, have a look at is the YouTube video, which I won't show today because it's a bit jumpy and we've run out of time. If you go to 360 underwater, maybe if you take a screenshot of that, go straight to this video. It'll show you a whole compilation of videos I've taken over the last 2 or 3 years of marine life in South Australia. You can get access to that through a VR headset through YouTube as well, and that's probably the best experience to have if you can actually watch it through a headset. It will work by spinning around the computer, but yeah, get a headset or maybe a Google Cardboard even where you can put your phone into the headset and view it that way. Ocean photography's got a whole collection of photos taken from around South Australia, around the world, and the Sea Dragon has got quite a few taken between probably Sydney and Adelaide of Leafy Sea Dragons and weedy sea dragons. All right, so I think I've got one more question here. Blue devils, how large? Oh, okay, so we'll see how many people got this right. The blue devil fish grows to about 36 centimetres long, so it's quite a small fish when it's fully grown, and they do grow up to 80 years old. And they'll stay in the same place, under the same ledge the whole life. You'll see them under the same ledge, and I'm sure my father, who dived here back in the 60s, probably saw the same blue devils I'm seeing today, the big ones. The largest I've seen were at Encounter Bay, Victor Harbour under a ledge. There were two actually about 36 centimetres, I'm sure they were longer, and they looked very pale, almost white. And I think they could have been probably 80 or more years old. So yeah, incredible fish. Fishermen do catch them quite easily because they get under ledges like quite shallow. But because they're blue, fishermen often put them back because they're such a beautiful fish. They often put them back in the water, which is great. I would like to say they're toxic to eat because they're blue, but that's not true. But a lot of fishermen do put them back, usually not sure what they are or they just look too beautiful to eat. So yeah, a bit of a fact. All right, well, thank you everyone for your time, and thank you Marion City for inviting me here today.